Kazakhstan is not a technological or economic superpower. But when it comes to ecosystem recovery, this country has been recognized by the United Nations as a global model. Today's story is a perfect example. In just 2 weeks, they discovered 200,000 dead SAIGA antelopes. 1 week later, 60% of the entire population had disappeared. Many people believed there was no hope left for them. But across a land nearly the size of Turkey, Kazakhstan launched a series of actions without relying on advanced technology or a massive budget. And just 9 years later, it received the most prestigious environmental award in the world, an award even the United States has never won. Let's begin. Kazakhstan is home to some of the largest continuous grasslands on Earth. The Kazakh steppe is considered the largest dry steppe in the world. It looks like an endless sea of grass, but do not let that image fool you. For this ecosystem to survive, it needs large grazing animals, gray wolves, steppe eagles, millions of migratory birds, and most importantly, the SAIGA antelope. If you see a SAIGA for the first time, you will probably notice its strange nose right away, but that funny-looking feature actually evolved to help it survive the harsh climate here. It filters dust in the summer and warms freezing air in the winter. But there was one threat that even that nose could not help them overcome. Yes, humans. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Kazakhstan's economy became even more difficult. People began killing SAIGA for meat, and especially poaching exploded for the horns of male SAIGA. From 1995 to 2004 alone, 280,000 animals were killed. The SAIGA population dropped by 97%. That number is so shocking, so just imagine this. Giant herds of SAIGA once moved from Eastern Europe all the way to China, but by 2003, only 21,000 were left. To avoid repeating the same SAIGA extinction disaster that happened in China, Kazakhstan launched Altyn Dala. The project covers about 185 million acres, nearly the size of Turkey. Instead of capturing animals and releasing them in large numbers, they focused on protecting the last wild individuals from poaching, protecting breeding grounds, conducting helicopter surveys, expanding protected areas, and working with local communities. But the story did not end that simply. Just as the project was beginning to show positive signs, the real disaster happened. In mid-May 2015, rangers began receiving unusual reports from the Betpak Dala region in central Kazakhstan. This was the largest breeding ground for the SAIGA. On May 11, researchers arrived at the site and recorded about 100 dead animals. The researchers observed that the SAIGA suddenly became weak. They could not hold their heads up, began drooling, struggled to breathe, developed diarrhea, and then collapsed. Many died only a few hours after the severe symptoms appeared. Just a few days later, the number of carcasses rose to 400, then 1,000. By May 19, almost the entire herd in this area had disappeared. The same thing continued to happen at other breeding grounds across the Betpak Dala population. According to the SAIGA Resource Center, the mass die-off lasted nearly a month and affected all major breeding sites in the region. After veterinarians and rangers collected samples for testing, one question remained: how would they handle hundreds of thousands of carcasses? Burying the SAIGA carcasses right at the site was the most practical solution. They could not leave hundreds of thousands of bodies scattered across the steppe because that could contaminate water sources and increase the risk of pathogens spreading further. When everything was over, 60% of the global population had disappeared. But only the SAIGA were affected. Veterinarians examined livestock in the area to see if the disease had spread, but they found no direct connection. At first, many theories were proposed: chemicals, a newly emerging disease, and other possible causes. But later studies showed that the main culprit was Pasteurella multocida serotype B, a type of bacteria that can normally exist inside an animal's body without causing harm. The problem was that before the disaster, the region had experienced about 10 days of unusually high temperature and humidity. Scientists believe that this rare environmental condition caused the bacteria to grow rapidly, enter the bloodstream, and trigger acute hemorrhagic septicemia. Honestly, this was not the first time the SAIGA had faced something like this. Data from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology shows that the Betpak Dala population had gone through at least 3 major mass die-off events since 1988. However, none of them had ever reached the scale of the 2015 disaster. If you had been there, you probably would have thought the same thing as the local people, that the SAIGA would soon disappear completely. But no, after the disease was brought under control, they immediately entered a recovery phase. The SAIGA is not an ordinary species. It has a very special biological advantage. The Frankfurt Zoological Society describes the SAIGA's reproductive ability as exceptionally high compared with many other large mammals. Females can reproduce when they are only about 1 year old, and they often give birth to twins. During just a few short weeks each year, tens of thousands of females give birth almost at the same time. So many calves appear within such a short period that wolves, foxes, and eagles cannot hunt them all. This is one of the reasons the SAIGA has survived from the Ice Age until today. In addition, the 2015 disaster did not wipe out the entire species. The Betpakdala population was hit the hardest, but other populations, such as Ural and Ustert, survived. According to Mongabe, only 1 year after the disaster, the Ural population increased from about 51,700 to more than 70,000, 200 animals, while Ustert rose from about 1,200 to nearly 1,900. Meanwhile, their actions did not stop. Anti-poaching patrol teams continued operating. Important breeding grounds were protected. Aerial and helicopter surveys were maintained. Migration routes were monitored more closely. Disease surveillance systems were strengthened, and local communities continued taking part in conservation. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally happened. From just a few tens of thousands of animals left after the severe decline, the SAIGA population grew to hundreds of thousands, and then to millions. By 2024, Kazakhstan recorded about 2.8 million SAIGA across the country. This is considered one of the most impressive recoveries of a land mammal in modern times. The world also began to change the way it looked at the species. In 2023, the IUCN lowered the SAIGA's threat status from critically endangered to near threatened. But compared with the scientists or the leaders of the Altındağ project, if the steppe itself could speak, perhaps it would be the happiest of all. Seriously, the SAIGA is a fairly small antelope. Males weigh about 90 pounds on average, while females are only about half that size. So how could they possibly change an ecosystem stretching across hundreds of thousands of square miles? But when there are a lot of small creatures, the story becomes very different. Unlike livestock, which are usually limited to fixed grazing areas, SAIGA are constantly moving across enormous distances. They do not depend on just a few familiar soft grasses. According to Animal Diversity Web, SAIGA can eat more than 100 different plant species, from grasses, sagebrush, and saltworts to many bitter, tough plants that livestock often avoid. A 2023-2024 study on Mongolian SAIGA also recorded that they used 48 plant species from 21 different genera, significantly more than horses, camels, sheep, or goats in the same area. That may not sound too important, right? But when a SAIGA herd passes through, they do not eat everything down to bare ground. They create areas of short grass, areas that are recovering, places where young plants begin to grow again, and open spaces suitable for birds to nest. The RSPB says SAIGA grazing helps support rare birds such as the sociable lapwing, one of the most threatened grassland birds in the world. Without naturally maintained open grasslands, these birds would lose their feeding and nesting ground. Even though they look a little awkward, with their heads always lowered, SAIGA can still run up to about 50 miles per hour. Every year, many herds make migrations that stretch for hundreds of miles, and sometimes nearly 620 miles. In spring, they gather at breeding grounds. In summer, they split into smaller groups, and in fall, they move again toward their wintering areas.
Humidity, wind,
These routes
terrain,
have existed for thousands of years, and they help maintain the connection of the entire steppe ecosystem. Throughout that journey, SAIGA unintentionally do many other jobs. Seeds stick to their fur, get caught under their hooves, or pass through their digestive system,
This
then are
is the
spread
life
to
or death
places
difference
hundreds of
compared
miles
to
away.
2015.
The RSPB recognizes
useless
SAIGA
if
as one
SAIGA
of
are
the
still
important
shot.
seed dispersers of the
Kazakhstan
Central
enforced the
Asian
strictest
steppe.
laws
At the
ever.
same time,
Up to
the
5
millions
years
of
in
droppings
jail,
they leave behind each
$20,000
year
fines,
also work like a
confiscation
giant
of
natural
trucks,
fertilizer
guns,
system.
and GPS
Nitrogen
gear.
and phosphorus
Most
are returned to the
importantly,
soil,
they turned
feeding
former hunters into
microorganisms,
community
decomposing
rangers.
insects,
People
and
who once
encouraging
hunted
fresh
SAIGA
grass
now
to grow.
use GPS,
In other
patrol and
words,
pickups,
SAIGA do not
get
just
paid
eat
by
grass.
UN
They
conservation
transport
projects
nutrients,
and
sow
report
seeds,
twice daily
and help
via
keep the
app.
entire steppe
As
functioning.
the result is clear,
And you know how it
poaching
works.
dropped
In
by
the
over
end,
90%
every living
after
creature becomes a source of
2018.
life
The most
for another.
crucial step
According
is
to the
protecting the
RSPB,
breeding grounds in
SAIGA
May,
carcasses
when
become an
50 to
important
70%
food source
of
for gray
female SAIGA
wolves,
have
foxes,
twins,
and many
right when the weather
scavenging
is
birds,
wettest.
such as the
These
black
areas are
vulture
closed
and the
to
Egyptian
vehicles and
vulture.
mining,
Many
with
people
warning
think that
signs
fighting
posted
climate
20 to
change
25
means
miles
planting
out.
forests. That is
Drones
true,
spot
but
carcasses,
it is not enough.
and rangers remove them
Healthy
within
grasslands
24
can
hours
also
so
store
they don't
enormous
become
amounts of carbon.
Pastorella
Unlike
incubators.
forests, where
About
carbon is
60
mainly
camera
stored in
traps
tree
run
trunks and leaves,
24/7,
most of the
stopping
carbon in the
outbreaks
steppe is
before
stored
they spread to
underground.
whole herds.
According to the FAO, grasslands contain about 20% of the world's soil organic carbon. Some studies also show that around 80% to 94% of the carbon in grassland ecosystems is stored in the soil and root systems, not in the plants above the ground. This is why SAIGA, kulan, and wild horses are far more important than many people realize. They do not directly absorb carbon like trees do, but they help maintain the steppe's carbon storage. According to the Frankfurt Zoological Society, the Altendale grasslands can store up to about 1,130 pounds of carbon per acre each year. When multiplied across millions of acres, this becomes a massive carbon vault beneath the ground. Studies also show that when large grazing animals disappear, the stability of carbon in the soil can decline over time. Perhaps that is why the world began paying attention. In 2022, Altendale was selected by the United Nations as a UN World Restoration Flagship, one of the world's leading ecosystem restoration projects. 2 years later, the project also won the 2024 Earthshot Prize in the Protect and Restore Nature category, one of the most prestigious environmental awards in the world. This comeback is still not over. Altendale aims to bring the SAIGA population to about 4 million by 2030, while actively managing and protecting about 21 million acres of important habitat. In reality, the speed of recovery has been much faster than many predictions. Kazakhstan recorded about 2.8 million SAIGA in 2024, and at the time you are watching this documentary, the population is now aiming to pass 3 million. To accurately track these enormous herds, scientists have to use airplanes, helicopters, and survey routes that stretch for thousands of miles. People who have taken part in these surveys say that when seen from above, some SAIGA herds are so large they seem to stretch all the way to the horizon. But the threats to their ancient migration routes have not disappeared. The border fence between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan has already cut across part of an important migration corridor for the Usturt population, which remains fairly fragile. At the same time, plans to build a railway through the Betpak-Dala region have also worried many conservationists, because this is the area where most of Kazakhstan's SAIGA live. But their rapid growth also brings new threats. Some people believe the population needs to be managed in order to reduce conflict with farmers and protect the grasslands. But others worry that if the door is open to controlled hunting or the commercial trade of horns, the poaching that once pushed the SAIGA to the edge of extinction could return. This may be the biggest lesson of the entire story. When a species is disappearing, humans want to save it at any cost. But when that species recovers more strongly than expected, humans have to learn how to live alongside it. And that may be the hardest challenge in modern conservation, not bringing nature back, but accepting its return. So, can humans learn to live with the comeback of the wild? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy real ecosystem recovery stories like this, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next journey.